Hey everybody, Dr. Acker back with you for day 2 of NSCI 306. You can see we've made a couple of adjustments. Hopefully the headset and mic will fix some of the reverb. It's on the first video, and I have secured actual Kleenex this time. Had to fight a few old ladies at Walmart for it, but there you go. Those are the times we live in. We're looking today at arguments. Let me switch over to our lecture notes. There we go. And this is one of my favorite Monty Python sketches of all time, the Argument Clinic. Michael Palin plays the poor guy who just wants in to buy an argument, and John Cleese plays the guy who gives it to him. Fortunately, Michael walks in, and he finds that all John Cleese is doing is disagreeing with him at every turn. At one point, he protests, "I came for an argument. This is just contradiction." And of course, the response, "No, it isn't." And they go back and forth for about 3 minutes. A very funny sketch. So look it up sometime when you need a laugh. But it also gets at a point that I think it's easy to overlook. And that is when we put together an argument, whether that is for an academic paper or in a conversation, you have to do more than just say, I agree or I disagree, or how am I going to approach this? I'm going to get into some of those specific techniques in next class's lecture. But today I want to give it an overview of how that process works, especially in terms of the they say, I say model, as well as some techniques for generating ideas to form arguments. And of course, we'll introduce you to paper 1, since that will be our first chance to practice that at length. So in our first hour, we'll be looking at the feedback mechanisms for this class, trying to follow up a little bit on last lecture, and then introduce how to use context to argue in terms of paper 1. If we have time at the end of the first hour, we'll look at a sample paper. Those are up on Blackboard for you. In the second hour, I'm going to introduce several tools to you to help you with that process. One is called close reading. You may have encountered this in literature classes before. It's a way to gather details from the text to decide how to use them in your paper. I also want to bring up several pre-writing tools. I think a big part of academic writing that's kind of causes a lot of anxiety is this idea of starting with a blank page, just saying I have to produce this entire argument from scratch. Well, good news is you don't actually have to do that. So I'm going to give you some tips for avoiding that process. And the last thing I want to do, the last big project, is going to be looking at the thesis statement. This will be review for some of you, especially if you've taken English 105 to 107 recently, but it's a really important part of your paper. It sort of forms the foundation of what you do for the rest of the time. So we'll look at that at some length, and I want to finish up by giving you some models for organizing your writing time and some tips for doing that well as you head into independent work for the first paper. So a couple things on the procedures for this class. I mentioned some of this last time. Do remember that there are specific instructions for every single writing assignment in this class. So pull those up on Blackboard first. Do not assume that I think something works the same way every single time. Like you might say, oh, this is a response paper. I've written a lot of response papers. I'm just going to find something and say something about the reading. It may not work well for that particular assignment. Some students find it helpful to just copy and paste those instructions into the document so they can have those in front of them, or you may just want to print them out. Whatever you do to refer to them regularly so that you stay on track. Not only will that help you with your grades, but it will help you kind of reach the learning objectives that we have for this course. From time to time, I will get papers turned in a course like this, and it just, even if the paper is decent, it's obviously not what the assignment called for. And you know, I kind of hate to give an otherwise interesting paper a C or a D. And one time I did that, and I told the student, you know, you write well, but this is not what I asked you to do. And he said, yeah, I saw your instructions, but I decided to go another direction with this. Please don't do that. There's a reason we organize these the way they are. So look over the instructions first. As I suggested last time, you want to do your actual writing in your word processor. So Microsoft Word, Google Docs is fine. A lot of students prefer Google Docs because it's cross-platform and it saves automatically. If you have a MacBook, you probably have Pages pre-installed. Whatever you use make sure you can export it or save it in Microsoft Word format. There's a site called Cloud Convert. I think it's just cloudconvert.com, which can help you put those files in the right format as well. And I do recommend taking some time at the end of the process. Make sure you have just little stuff like the header, the page numbers. Those are easy to overlook. If you start with the MLA or APA templates on Blackboard, you'll have those automatically. And make sure you just have all the components. You know, it's just like if you're taking an exam in class, you want to go through and see how many pages there are, you know, how many questions you have to answer, that kind of stuff. Because if you miss instructions there, then you're probably going to lose a lot of points on the test. And the same thing will apply here. Here's the help page for submitting assignments to Blackboard. At this point, I think a lot of you have done this already, but if you're transferring in, maybe use Canvas or Moodle or some other tool like that, it's worth taking a look at those. Every time you submit something successfully, you should get a confirmation screen and I believe an email for every time you upload a file. So if one or both of those doesn't show up, you want to definitely go back and make sure that the file went through it, that it was the correct one. I've had a lot of students send the rough draft instead of the final draft, or sometimes send a completely wrong file just because it had a similar name. So double check that. And you do have the option to submit multiple files in most of the assignments. So you can do that if you mess up on the first one. When you get your feedback, it's going to kind of come in 3 stages. So this first one is markup on the draft. And I use Blackboard's online grading tool for this rather than Microsoft Word. It's less powerful, but it's a lot more accessible to everyone involved. Every time I do something in Word, then there's going to be 1 or 2 students who just can't open it for whatever reason, and that kind of defeats the purpose. So what you can do on Blackboard is download an annotated PDF. And if you're having trouble doing that, I can show you how to pull that up after we go through the first round of rough drafts. And what you'll see is, like in the graphic here, these little blue comment boxes. Now, the thing with Blackboard grading is that there's no way for me to just like cross out a word or even just to highlight something and say, hey, this is the wrong thing, or fix this spelling or spacing error or whatever. So every time I want to make a correction or a comment, I have to use the little blue box here. This can look really intimidating because if there's a lot to fix, then you'll see blue boxes all over the place. Please don't stress out about that. It just means there's a lot to address there, but a lot of it's going to be small stuff like, you know, this word was misspelled or put a comma here or something like that. In this particular sample, there's actually not a whole lot there. If there are grammar problems, I will usually mark up a lot there. I don't mark every single thing that needs adjusted, but I will try to mark at least one instance of, say, a grammar mistake that I keep seeing, or if there's a particular part where you're not quite fulfilling the assignment requirements, then I will mark that once, and then maybe the future ones will say, you know, seek my previous comment on this. So what you'll do on your end, and it won't show up on the PowerPoint here, of course, but if you just mouse over one of these comments on Blackboard, it should pop up with the message. I don't think that works very well on the mobile interface, so you want to pull it up on a computer. And this is where the annotated PDF comes in. If you downloaded that, then at the very end of the document, it'll give you a list of the comments, and each of these are numbered in that. It'll show you what I actually said there. So you might want to have that and maybe look at the last page or print on the last page so you can see the list as you go through there. I also use graded rubrics. I'm going to show you the paper 1 rubric a little bit later this hour. For every assignment worth more than 20 points, I've given you a rubric on Blackboard, and you can pull that up by just going to the Dropbox, or the place where you go to upload the file, and there should be a little gray button on the right-hand side that says View Rubric. So those are in place for all the response papers, I believe for the paper 2 proposal, of course, for the rough draft and final draft of papers 1 and 2. But that may be about it for this quarter. Everything else is a pretty small portion. You'll see that each of these has a description as well as a point level. And I've organized them a little bit differently than in the screenshot here. I'd use percentages rather than points. It's just a little easier to handle There will, of course, be times when you meet maybe most of the requirements for, say, the excellent here, but a couple of them are just in the good category. And you see there's a little bit of room there. So you might get 7 points if I thought you're generally in here, but you did a good job in one part, or you were generally in here, but one part of it needs work. And I try to highlight those in one of the other feedback. So I do this because I think you should get credit for all the work you do on the paper, even if some parts of it are not quite where they need to be yet, especially on the rough draft. That's going to be common. For the major papers, usually the rough draft and the final draft have very similar categories, but of course things like, the number of quotes you analyze or the paper length are going to change. I'll show you that in paper 1 a little bit later. Then the last bit you get in the written feedback will be overall comments. I do leave comments on parts of your draft, but I try to give sort of an overall view that will be on the right-hand side of your screen. This one I wrote a fair amount here. Some cases I'll just say, this works well overall. Here are a couple of things to keep track of. Or if I've left most of my comments on the draft itself, then I'll say something like, you're on the right track here, or good job so far, or good start, whatever it is. And then something like, please use my comments to guide your revisions. I want to emphasize that you have multiple kinds of feedback here. So you might just see, I think you see this feedback when you pull up your grade book. And that's not going to be everything that I have to say on every paper, especially on the rough drafts. So you do want to pull that up, pull the actual assignment feedback up and do that. If you're having any trouble accessing that or reading it, or if you have any questions about it, please send me an email, let me know. The last thing I want to mention on the feedback is that for both of the major papers, paper 1 and paper 2, we will have individual conferences to discuss the draft overall and kind of priorities for those moving forward. And those won't take long, 5 or 10 minutes, I think, for each student. But since we don't have the advantage of talking before or after class about those, or having physical office hours where you can come in and look at that, just sit down in person, I think it will help to check in there. In most cases, there's about a week to week and a half lag between the time the rough draft is due and the time of the rough draft conferences. And I'm going to use that time to do at least preliminary written feedback on your draft, so that when you come in, you have something to go over together, and it's not just me going through the paper and saying, okay, fix this and fix this and fix this, because that's not very useful. I could have done that just by the email. So hopefully that will give you a better sense of what to expect. I do a lot of markup on rough drafts, and then on final drafts, it's generally kind of an overall grade and say, here's how the revisions went. If at any point you're not sure what I mean by a comment, or if you want to know how the grade breakdown went, then let me know. I want to shift gears then and look at one of the main frameworks for our course, which is this idea of arguing in context. So I draw here a lot on the They Say, I Say book. And one reason I assigned this in pretty much all of my writing classes is because it gets at an element of academic writing that a lot of people miss. That it's not just about saying, hey, I have this idea, or I've produced this data, or I want to propose this theory. It's saying, how does this connect to what other people have said or done or argued? And how do I contribute to that conversation? And you already saw a lot of that language in my first lecture in terms of writing as a relational process. So I want to come back to that idea here and say that not only is writing relational, because you write to other people, you write sometimes about other people, you write on some topic it's going to influence their lives, but the process of argument, whether that is a good, productive, respectful argument, or whether that is a screaming match, it is relational. It draws on relationships, it promotes or advances certain relationships, and it requires communicating with other people to promote specific persuasive goals. And I think that is a key part of the definition, because if you get to the end of an argument and there's nothing new in what your audience thinks or believes or does, then you have failed in some significant way. So one way you can do that is to relate your claims to previous topics or previous arguments. And it might be something that that person has said, in a normal conversation. That's typically how we operate. Or it might even be just, this is something that came up before. This is maybe something else that you read in the class, or this is another idea that you've heard. We do this on a natural level every time we have a conversation. At lunch today, I was talking with my wife about the latest news on the coronavirus and various efforts that the governments are making or not making to stem the spread of it, and all the stats updates and all this stuff. And some of our conversation was back and forth. So, I would say this, you say, well, what about this? And I'd kind of respond there. But some of it was also, I read this story about this happening, or, we need this information to figure out this, and why can't we do just like that? And writing actually can work the same way, but you have to be explicit about that in a paper. You have to be clear who you're talking to and in what context you're setting up for that argument. So I like the way that Graff and Bergenstein put it in their introduction to this book. They point out that writing well means engaging the voices of others and letting them in turn engage us. So there's their they say, I say model, which we'll get into a little bit later this quarter. But they also stress that this is not just about writing academic papers well. That's an important skill. You're here in this class for that reason. But it's about helping students, as they put it, become active participants in the important conversations of the academic world and the wider public sphere. Because here's the good news. All these skills that you're learning and practicing in college classrooms, especially writing classrooms, will not go away just because you graduate college. You may not ever have to write another term paper, but you will have to understand data. You will have to analyze, how does this work? Is this person or this group or this party or whatever trustworthy? Can I find a good source for this information? And how do I behave in light of this argument? I mean, what am I going to do as a result? And what do I hope people will do as a result of my arguments? And so the they say, I say model may not show up in exactly the same ways in every kind of essay that you do, but the rhetorical structure is still going to be there. To make your argument relevant and important and potentially convincing, you've got to make it relevant to a particular context with a particular audience. And that may mean saying, this is going to be helpful or relevant only to some of you, and the rest of you are probably not going to care. And that's actually okay in a lot of rhetorical contexts. It's very rare that you actually have to talk to everybody at the same time and convince them in the same way. It just doesn't really work too well. So let me give you an example of how this conversation might work. They talk in this language a lot in the book. The basic parts are the they say, what has come before, what have others said, maybe what you yourself thought earlier. And then the I say is, of course, your response. So I'm going to give you some techniques in the second hour to do this, but the basic overview here starts with very careful and active reading. And this can be a challenge depending on the type of material that you're reading or the topic. You're probably having to absorb new information, maybe looking at techniques or vocabulary that's completely new. Maybe it's just really difficult technical material. Maybe you're reading in a language or a dialect that you're not familiar with. And that is going to add some stress and add some difficulty in. What you can do, though, is find ways where you can potentially contribute. And the best way to do that is to start by tracking what's important about the they say part, the argument that you're reading. We'll go over the close reading model later on today. From there, we're also going to look at this in the second hour. You want to use the notes that you take to start pre-writing exercises. And I'll go over the materials for that in the second hour. The other reason I really like this textbook is because it has templates. Every single chapter has one or more of these, and they're in the bold print here. I don't know if you can see them on the preview there. There is an entire, there it is, on page 11 in the 4th edition. There's a section called the Template of Templates. This is wonderful because if you can get to where you can fill in the blanks here, you'll have a very good start on a full argument. Obviously, they'll expand because the template is only 1 paragraph long, but it's a way to get you thinking and to get you used to structure your arguments in some way. You can also go, I believe they have an index at the back. Yeah, at the very back of the book, there's an index of templates. It's on page 309 in this edition, and it refers you back to the page numbers to explain how those templates work. So what I recommend is, as you're going through your essays, don't just think in terms of what content do I want? What do I want to say here? But think of what am I trying to accomplish and use the templates to kind of match up that skill. Are you trying to say, here's what other people have done, here's how I'm going to contribute? Are you trying to criticize someone or an idea? Are you trying to say, I like this, but there are parts of it maybe are iffy there? And we'll go over some of those specific techniques as we get further into the quarter. And then, of course, there's the big part, the drafting and revision. We're going to look at drafting skills a little bit today and come back to revision, editing, and proofreading later in the quarter. So I'll hold off on some of that because otherwise I'd be talking about editing for the entire 2 hours. So that is the structure that I encourage you to use as you think about organizing your ideas. This is also a good way to set up individual claims, because a big point in They Say, I Say is if you just try to write like no one has ever talked about this before, then you're going to waste a lot of time. You're going to lose a lot of your audience. The more context you can give a claim, the easier it is to focus that, and the easier it is to clarify what you're trying to do and what you're not trying to do, which can be important for your audience. A good way to think of this is if you try to write in a vacuum, as if there's nothing else around you, then your writing is going to suck. Yes, that was a pun. Let me give you an example of how this might work. So if we start with a basic, pretty weak claim, Ned Flanders is more than just a stereotype. Now we've got some content here. We know that we are talking about this guy, Ned Flanders. We don't quite know who that is yet. And we know that there's some basic idea that he's more than just a stereotype. As we'll look at later today, though, the issue with a claim like this is that it doesn't leave a lot of room for discussion or for counter argument. Because at this point, what you basically have is, if you think of the counter arguments, what you basically have is, yes, he is. And then you're back to the argument clinic where you just go back and forth and automatically gainsay what the other person has said. And this is not a very productive way to maintain a conversation. So to make this claim better, we need to figure out how we're going to focus it, and we need to put it in some context that more people will care about. There's always going to be more context you could give or more things that the reader needs to know. But here's one way we can start this after a revision. While Simpson's character Ned Flanders may seem like a stereotypical conservative Christian, he actually understands and lives out his faith in complex and interesting ways. I would love to read this paper, incidentally, if you're looking for paper topics. Now, we've made a lot of changes here, and I wouldn't expect anybody to do this just on the first draft of revision, because it takes a lot of thinking and revision and trying to figure out what is it I want this paper to do? But the first move is very simple. It says, well, who exactly is Ned Flanders? Because in theory, there could be some poor benighted soul who has never actually seen The Simpsons. And if that's you, well, I'm not sure whether to feel sorry for you, feel pity, or to be really kind of jealous because now you have the opportunity to watch at least the first 20 seasons or so. You can skip everything from 21 to 30. It's kind of terrible. But it is important to clarify in this case that Ned Flanders is a fictional character. He's not a real person. And so that is going to influence, obviously, the kind of data you can draw on, but also the kind of ways that we understand how this works. From there, we get the second part. It may seem like a stereotypical conservative Christian. And you can see the echo of the language from the first version here, more than just a stereotype. But here's where you can use the context to clarify what exactly you're trying to do in the paper. Excuse me. If you have seen the show, you know that you could put Ned Flanders in a lot of different boxes. He is left-handed. He is a business owner. He is a widower. He is a father. He is a next-door neighbor. He is a Republican. And all of those could potentially come with their own stereotypes. And, The Simpsons is a comedy. A lot of it is satirical. And so it plays with those stereotypes in the same way that any of the characters kind of play to their strengths, play to the comedy there. What this phrase does is say, you know what? I know this is a complicated character, that he has a lot going on that could be relevant for an analysis like this. But I want to focus on this particular part of his character and show you in the rest of the paper why that's important. Based on this, I might expect particular descriptors, particular scenes, maybe that go to this part of Ned's identity. And I would also expect other parts of his identity to kind of take a back seat, where if I just see this first version, then I might think as a reader, okay, this could go a lot of different directions. And it's not quite clear where the author is interested or why the particular matters. So that in this first part is actually doing a lot of rhetorical work, saying who is this and where's the they say, that this language it may seem like. Here's the I say. He actually understands and lives out his faith in complex and interesting ways. So we still have not stated outright what are those complex and interesting ways. And actually, that's a good thing. We're going to come back to that in the second hour when looking at thesis statements. But one thing you want to do in a claim like this is to set up tension. Set up a way that gives you something else to talk about for the rest of the paper. So that will be one of our topics for hour 2. But you can see also here, we get phrases like complex, interesting ways. And as a reader, you should be saying, okay, show me, prove it. Why are those complicated? Why are they interesting? Is there a contradiction here, or is there a tension here? Is there something that maybe wouldn't fit what the reader or viewers of the TV show would expect from this kind of character? And so you could really use this as a productive starting point, because now instead of just saying, so here's this one stereotype, and oh, by the way, here's the way that he doesn't really fit, and here's this other stereotype, and well, I guess the same argument, here's the way he doesn't really fit. And by the time you get to the third or fourth stereotype, your reader's getting really tired of reading your paper, even if they're getting paid to read your paper. So do a favor for all your professors and make interesting claims right up front, rather than just starting broad because you think you have to talk about the whole thing to fill all the space. And we'll get to some of those techniques again a little bit later today. That takes us to paper 1. Now, I mentioned earlier that part of the goal of the they say, I say structure is to train you to read and write critically in the public sphere. And journalism is a big part of that. This is where we get not just information, but commentary. Every journalist and all the people, in charge of deciding what gets put on the air or the newspaper or on the blog or whatever, they make rhetorical choices. They say, we're going to write about this from this angle. We're going to highlight this data. We're going to cover this story. We're not going to cover this story. And we're going to use certain words or tones or everything to do this. What I want to look at in the first paper is how science factors into that. Now, this is not necessarily about how to understand scientific issues or scientific controversies, but it is about how science sort of as a discipline, as a general topic, as a set of discourses, gives us a tool to understand news stories, particularly controversy. Because you can pick up well, I won't say pick up a newspaper because that would require like an actual physical newspaper. You can pull up any news site or turn on any news channel, and you will find somewhere an expert. And it's probably not going to be the journalist. It's going to be someone they're interviewing, someone that they're quoting, someone that they are relying on to make part of their argument or to say, we have this number. So that, today, it's not just, according to this weird professor in the English department at Cal State, we have roughly 200,000 coronavirus cases in the US. It's according to Johns Hopkins, because we trust Johns Hopkins methodology and data and research scientists and everything. And so you're going to look at how that process works rhetorically. I want you to find an article on some controversial issue. It doesn't have to be a scientific issue. And see how the coverage could influence readers to view that issue in a certain way. Now, a caveat here, a lot of stuff on news sites, it all has an agenda, but a lot of stuff is kind of marked as opinion or commentary. You want to avoid those for this assignment because I want to look at how does the reporting factor in here. So make sure you have that down, and I'll give you some samples on Blackboard for that. As you analyze how that works, you want to look both at what's in the article, so what content is covered, as well as the author's rhetorical techniques. We're going to go over rhetorical appeals, for example, pretty soon in the next couple of classes. And you can also always look ahead at the readings for that. The stuff on writingcommons.org is very helpful. Your job is not to make an argument about the topic, but to understand how the author approaches that and how readers might respond. So what are the priorities, viewpoints, perspectives of the author, the journalist, and how might the way this article is structured, the way it works, how is that going to influence potential readers? So your job is to set up and defend a potentially controversial thesis claim about how the article works. And I'll show you how that works in the sample if we have time at the end of this hour. You can also go to the assignment sheet as well as the sample papers on Blackboard. I see a lot of rough drafts for this assignment that have a thesis on global warming or on overpopulation or on vaping or whatever the article is about, and that sort of misses the point of this assignment. This is not an opinion piece on how this works. This is an analysis piece on how the author, the journalist, does his or her job to present the information. We run through the requirements. For the rough draft, this is going to be 800 plus words. You'll end up with between 1250 and 1500. So if you're the type that likes to write as much as possible on the rough draft and kind of do shorter revisions later on, then you want to cap that at 1500 words. 800 words is going to be about 3.5 pages, and at the end it's going to be between probably 5 and 6 pages. So if it helps you to have those in mind, you can use that to break down your work sessions. This will be pretty straightforward. Double space it, put in 12-point font, whichever one you want to use. Make sure there are page numbers in the upper right corner. The templates on Blackboard will help you do that. In the upper left corner, I do need a header, and that's just going to be your name, NSCI 306 on the next line, and then the date. And please have some sort of creative title besides paper number 1 or science and journalism or something like that. Find some way to connect that to your argument or to the specific things you want to highlight in how that's working. As I mentioned last time, you have the choice in this class of using MLA or APA style for your citations. Those will be both for in-text and for your bibliography. And APA is called references, and MLA is called works cited. For this paper, it generally just has the one source. So you want to look up how to cite an online newspaper article. And again, you can use the resources on Blackboard or on the Science and Society course page or the textbook page to do that. And in the course of the paper, I want you to analyze at least 4 specific quotes to advance and support your arguments. This is a good way to structure your overall paper. I've given you some suggestions on the larger assignment sheet to break down the paragraphs for doing that individually. And you're going to look at small pieces of evidence here. And it's good practice because in most of your college papers, certainly you'll be working with page limits or word limits. And so if you get into the habit of making many interesting claims about relatively small pieces of evidence, 1 sentence or less, then you'll be able to make a more interesting argument than if you just rely on trying to quote the whole thing and just say at the end of the quote, "So that just happened." Probably the most extreme version of this that I've seen was in a Bible literature course. The assignment was to write about some aspect of popular culture that uses the Bible. And so my students said, I want to write about this movie, Evan Almighty, which is sort of a retelling of the account of Noah and the flood from the book of Genesis. And it was about a 5-page paper. So I was kind of excited about this because I thought there were a lot of interesting parallels, and you could do all sorts of fun stuff with the imagery and with what changes in the movie version. And I got the draft, and it was technically 5 pages long, but the first 2 pages quoted the Noah story from Genesis, and not even with any commentary, just did a block quote from the entire thing. Pages 3 and 4 summarize the plot of Evan Almighty, like basically pulled up IMDb and kind of grabbed that. And there was one little paragraph on page 5 where the author's main argument was, well, the movie wasn't really like the book, and I think it should have been more like the book. And it kind of hurt to read that paper because there was so much potential to work with smaller, interesting, complicated pieces of evidence and make a sophisticated, potentially controversial argument, and just kind of overwhelm the paper with so many block quotes that his voice got lost in it. So we want to avoid that if at all possible. In terms of topics, I want you to stick to these particular news websites to find your article. In the last time I taught this, pretty much everyone went to CNN or Fox News. There's often some overlap between Reuters and AP News and those others, just because they tend to draw on AP and Reuters news wires. You can also go to BBC News. If you want, you can, I don't think I linked this to you on the assignment handout actually, but if you want, you can start in their science news sections, but honestly, a lot of the controversy is going to be in something like news or politics. You can just kind of read through that to figure out where you might get some information. A couple ideas for finding topics. You may be familiar with the site procon.org. This is sort of a way to bring together controversial issues with some links, usually relatively old stuff, arguing different sides of the issue. So the articles on Procon specifically are going to be too old for this assignment. You need to have stuff published since 2016. But they will give you search terms. So you can pull up, especially the health and medicine and science and technology sections, and say, what are they writing about? And I'll show you how that might work in a minute. Once you decide what topic you're interested in, it might be just something that's current and topical. There's a lot right now on public health and prevention and medical supplies and all this stuff. And everybody is quoting various authorities and scientists. I think it is helpful to look at how different news sites cover the same topic, because those differences reflect rhetorical choices, and that's going to be good stuff for you to write about. And I will demo that a little bit in the next couple of slides here. So find articles that focus on the news, that give some information, but that are especially long enough to demonstrate some bias or some evidence that the author has a rhetorical agenda, because they do, even if they don't say so. For better or worse, our major news organizations operate this way. It's a pretty safe bet that if you read something on CNN, it's going to lean at least center left, if not pretty hard left. And if you read something on Fox News, it's going to lean center right or hard right. It can be helpful to read both of those, arguably, but that sort of bias is what's sort of rhetorically interesting about the pieces. So I would recommend going through the list of articles on Blackboard. You can just plug the titles into Google, that should come right up. And that'll give you a sense of the topics that others have covered and the kind of articles that worked well for this paper. Let me show you how this could work. So our case study for this is this article by Matt Egan called America's Renewable Energy Capacity is Now Greater Than Coal. This came out in June 2019, so in the way back before every single news piece was about coronavirus. And it involves some important scientific concepts, but it's also an area of science that has a big influence on the rest of us, on the non-scientists, because it's economic. It's about energy policy. Now, Matt Egan is a well-trained journalist. He's written a lot for CNN, but he definitely has an agenda, and it comes through really strongly in a lot of the different elements of his work. So let me pull this up for you. And we will switch windows here. Okay, so here's the actual page because he updated last June. Mute the autoplay. There's a lot we could look at in terms of this article. We could start even with the title. What does it mean to use this term renewable energy? And why is it specifically contrasted in this case with coal? This is CNN Business, so this is not specifically a political article or specifically a scientific article. The other kind of things you can look for here is who gets quoted. Where are the links? So it's talking about a report here up front, but we also have quotes from a nonprofit research group supporting sustainable energy. And there's another term, sustainable. How might that relate to renewable, and why might they choose to use those? We've got quotes from them. We've got data on usage of coal. And because this is CNN, we have references to President Trump. In this case, the milestones come despite President Donald Trump's promise to prop up the coal industry by cutting environmental rules. And a little bit later, given these trends, McDermott, the green tech capital partner, called the Trump administration's effort to save coal a ridiculous concept, akin to trying to save the rotary phone. So there is, at least for this journalist, a political element to this story. Whether it's legitimate or not, well, that's kind of a separate question. That may be something you could critique. But he says quite a bit here, and he quotes a lot of different sources and a lot of things that he considers authoritative. So if you wanted to look at something like this, we show you how this might look in terms of the kind of questions you could ask. I would start by looking at the title. What sort of expectations do we get here? Who is likely to click through to read this? We have an infinite variety of sources we could go to for news. And why might they emphasize certain terms? Related to that, what are the overall important terms or concepts in the article? Do they use these in particular ways? Do they use a certain way to describe the thing, the phenomenon, whatever it is? And is that rhetorically significant? What are the actual claims here, and what context does he make those? Now, this is where I think the article gets interesting, because you could say, well, Matt Egan's job is to just report the news. But he can report it in a certain way. He can say, well, this is how Americans view coal according to this survey. And then you might ask, well, why this survey? Is this reliable? Is this biased? Who's getting cited here? And that's the next big question. Who gets the quote? Is there a back and forth here? Like, do they quote people from multiple sides? How do they describe them? How do they characterize those quotes? When we look at especially the Pierce article for next class, you will see a lot of commentary, not just on the science involved in the debate, but on the people involved. And we'll want to talk about then, especially, how does Pierce present these characters, and is this an effective or professional way to go about that? In fact, that'll be one of your homework assignments, to look at that. So look in an article both at who gets quoted and who gets left out. Is there a perspective that seems to be missing here, or do they try to balance something out? You could also think about how this article works with bigger political or cultural concerns. I've highlighted a couple of points in this article where Trump comes up. It's CNN. They do that a lot. And there could be parts where this is a legitimate part of the story. In this case, he mentions a certain set of political policies. And you could say, well, okay, yeah, even if Trump himself did not actually get up and make a speech saying we have to do this, then those could have implications for understanding this issue better. But journalists also may use this opportunity maybe to take a shot at someone in power, or to say, this is part of a positive or a negative political movement, or even to point towards broader cultural trends. This is something we're seeing a lot also in the coronavirus coverage, because there are only so many stories you can do on, well, here's the latest testing technique, or here are the rules and procedures that California has in place right now. Here are the timelines. There's always going to be the human interest. So do they highlight, that the heroic nurse who is separated from her family because she's working 80 hours a week to care for people, or the researchers, or the paramedics? Do they highlight the teachers who are trying to do all the online education? Do they highlight the students who are going without their school-provided lunches? There's always a way to connect news to culture, including to the politics in that culture. And I think it's fair to evaluate how that might work. And then pay close attention both to how the article opens, but also how it ends, because it helps to think of this in terms of what's the next step in this conversation. What are we supposed to do with the information? And what sort of tone do you have based on that? Is this hopeful? Is this ominous? Is this somewhere in between? What do they want readers to do or think as a result here? So there's a lot of potential material here. And I don't want you to feel like you have to answer every single question in a 5-page paper. You will not have room. But use these to give you things to start from. My hope is that as you go through questions like this, and through the tools that I'll give you in the second hour, you will get ideas for details that you might have overlooked or for patterns that you see that could help you generate actual material. Because ultimately, this should be driven by the stuff that you're interested in and the stuff that you think is interesting and significant that you notice in these articles. Here are grading rubrics. It's follow the same format that the sample I showed you earlier, with the exception of the percentages here. That's why the numbers are a little bit weird. As you go through, especially the rough draft, and even as you're in your peer workshop, take a look at the standards for excellent. This is A level, B level, C level, D level. And each one of these is with 25%, so you can see how that's where the proportions work. I will get into the thesis part next hour. Evidence we talked a little bit about already. I might come back to that in a future lecture. For grammar and style, my main priority is making sure that the sentences are clear and they kind of flow well together, especially for this early paper. So if grammar is something that you often struggle with, then it's worth putting a little bit extra time into proofreading that, maybe having a friend or a classmate look at that as well, and the peer workshop will help there as well. And then the other one is just formatting. These should be really easy points. If you use the templates and if you go through and follow the instructions on the assignment sheet, then you will be just fine. Easy 12.5 out of 50 points here. When we get to the final draft, a lot of this stays the same categories here, just the number of quotes goes up here. So in the rough draft, I want to see analysis of at least 2 to 3 quotes. In the final draft, at least 4, but if you want to go up to 6, that's okay. These is the same. Length changes for the formatting, and then the grammar is the same there. So our schedule for this, on April 21st, which is about 2 weeks after this official date for this lecture, you will do your peer workshop. The first step for that will be turning in a draft on Blackboard of about 700 words, and notice that will go into the peer workshop folder, not into the rough draft folder. Your rough draft needs to be a little bit longer than that, 800 plus words, due the next day, when it's April 22nd. So Tuesday, that's all we're doing in class. So you got the whole day to work on that. Between the 22nd and the 30th, I will be giving you written feedback, and then each of you will meet with me. We'll probably try to do all of those on the 30th, maybe like the 29th, 30th. We'll see how those work out. Just talk for 5 or 10 minutes via Zoom on stuff that I noticed, and maybe your ideas or what you're working on for the revisions. And then you've got several days after that. Tuesday, May 5th will be the final draft, the final due date for those. So do yourself a favor, take some time, even today, the next couple of days, start reading articles, get a sense of what you might want to work on, ask any questions about the assignment, and go from there. All right, let me see how we are doing on time. I think we're okay. Let me go ahead and go over a few things on the sample paper. So this is just on Blackboard, and you can find this under Major Paper 1. Get this set up, there we go. All right, so here, to get this, you just click through here, and this is Paper 1, Sample 1. Now, I don't put perfect papers up, but I put instructive papers up. What I want to do is show you some of the things that this paper does well, and kind of show you the basic rhetorical moves. So this is on perhaps one of the central controversies in terms of scientific data and how it should affect public policy, climate change or global warming. And notice, first of all, that this first sentence is a very compact way of introducing the topic. I'm going to say a few things about structure in those intros a little bit later in the second hour, but you could easily start here and then write 3 or 4 more paragraphs just on climate change as a phenomenon, or what various people think, who's pro and con, and what we're supposed to do about that. That is not the goal of this paper. So I appreciate that the student stopped here and said, here's the thing that I'm writing about, and immediately transitioned into how this works in terms of the article that he was analyzing. So they say, I say move. Although most people focus on this, here's what I want to talk about. The impacts of the ocean often get overlooked, despite the fact that the ocean is composed of roughly 70% of the Earth. So we've got kind of an interesting hook there, and he uses that to introduce the title and the author, and then to make the claim, the thesis claim about how this works. I'm going to go over the thesis statements next hour, so I don't want to spend too much time here, but it's a pretty straightforward introduction. Here's what I'm writing about in general. Here's how this connects to the specific thing, and here's the claim I want to make about how this article works. The body paragraphs are organized simply but consistently, explains what is the author doing in this article, what is the journalist doing, I should say, giving a quote here, and then analyzing that quote in terms of the thesis claim here, which is that the author wants to inform her audience and inform us about the consequences, but also manipulate us. This is how rhetoric works. It's manipulation for fun and profit by explaining to the audience his emotions as well as using other rhetorical techniques. So here, for instance, we see her tone of this quote is very urgent, as she wants to emphasize the fact that in recent years, the effects of climate change have been the largest to date and have been induced by the human population. The author connects this to the kind of data that's cited. It's a really important move to make it a paper like this. Shows that there's actually a graph here. So if you pull up the website with the article, you would see that. And then says, why is that important? So we have overall approach. What is she doing? Specific evidence, the quote. Why is this quote important? What do you notice about this? And sort of what's the overall payoff here? Why is this rhetorically important? And how is this going to affect the readers? And you can follow that pattern throughout most of the paragraphs here. So we've got references to the study here. We've got a reference that we saw, I believe, in the title. Yes, oceans are warming at the same rate as if 5 Hiroshima bombs were dropped in every second. And this is where the author of the paper gets into the force of that comparison, the force of that analogy, including pointing out that this is not just, hey, this is a lot of energy being released, but associating that with a particular destructive force. Of course, the H-bombs dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. So make some really smart observations about tone and word choice here. A lot of summaries and paraphrases to supplement the quotes here. And then at the end, we have the so what and the now what. These are the 2 most important questions to ask about any argument. The so what is, why is this significant? So the author says outright, climate change is a very pressing issue, affects a numerous amount of lives. Here's how this particular article works. Here's what the author, the journalist, is trying to do. And this is sort of a summary of where the argument has been. And kind of ends up with the now what. All right, what do we know as a result of this analysis? How is this article informing us or helping us? How is my interpretation informing us there? So yeah, there could be some more polish here, or maybe other things could be more specific. There are definitely some proofreading things that need attention here. But overall, it's a really good paper. It shows how the article works, and it shows what specific evidence contributes to that, not just in terms of the content, but also in terms of the rhetoric. So I appreciate the work that the student did on this paper. We're going to break there, and then in the second hour, go over some techniques for specific close reading techniques, as well as pre-writing to get us into the thesis statements. I'll see you back then.